Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets. A midfield that was not only untouchable, which we'll touch on in a bit, but also priceless. Seriously, they all came from La Masia, and they were all Barcelona captains at one point, with Sergio Busquets announcing his departure from Barca following the end of the 22-23 La Liga season. The club will no longer feature any of these three for the first time since 1998. And even further to that, no more regular first-team players remain from Pep Guardiola's final year in 2012. I mean, technically Sergio Roberto was around back then, but he was only 20 and played one league game that year, so doesn't really count in my books. In this video, we take a moment to look back on the rise of an iconic trio. Yo, what is going on everyone? Really hope you're all doing well. I'm Tinashe, welcome back to the channel. My microphone stand broke, so I'm going to be holding this. Before we get into this one, I want to clarify two things. First of all, I've already talked about Guardiola's Barcelona here, so all team-related stuff will be there. Second of all, we're not here to talk about which midfield was best or not and compare. I'm just here to talk about a particular trio that gave me a feeling that I don't think any other trio has given me before. With that being said, if you disagree, throw down your nominations and fight me in the comments. Xavi Hernandez, born in 1980, was the eldest and the first of the trio to debut for Barcelona, joining La Masia at 11 years old. His abilities on the ball were never called into question, as it was well known by all that he was gonna be pretty good. Despite this, he was small. Concerns over whether he could hack it in La Masia were raised early on because of this. Luckily, the concerns didn't amount to anything substantial. Making his way through the ranks, he made his debut for the first team in '98. He made 17 appearances in the league in his first year and walked away with a La Liga winners medal in the same year. By the next, he was an important part of the team. This was always going to be the case, but it was an injury to usual deep-lying midfielder Pep Guardiola that gave him the chance to rise in prominence. And oh man, did he rise in prominence. It's what you'd expect from the 1999 La Liga Breakthrough Player of the Year. He was magical on the ball. No blistering pace, no overwhelming strength, no otherworldly vertical leap. It was the footwork, the balance, the vision, and the grace that gave us all a strong indication that he would stick around for almost 2 more decades. Unfortunately, Barcelona's fortunes took quite the dip in the years that followed. Big money spent on players that did not work out, threats of bankruptcy, mismanagement, and just about everything bad happened. A drop in their league position was inevitable. Legends had gotten old and were leaving, many of whom would return. Pep Guardiola and Luis Enrique come to mind. Anyway, things weren't going great, but there was good that came out of this period. As the story goes, Pep Guardiola and Xavi were having a casual chat at some point around the late 90s. There was a boy that was tearing everyone to shreds in La Masia and drawing a lot of attention to himself while doing it. Pep, having already known of this boy's abilities, then turned to Xavi and simply said, "You will retire me, but this boy will retire us all." He was already a good player in his mother's womb. Another classic Guardiola quote. As we'll soon find out, it was pretty much near impossible for Guardiola to think more highly of this guy. Born in 1984, Andrés Iniesta definitely lived up to the hype that surrounded him early on. It's near unfair to compare these players as they did different things well and were all masters of their craft, but many people pick out Iniesta as the best of the bunch. It of course helps that he's the most decorated of all three, winning more trophies than any other Spanish player in history too. 35 trophies over his career as opposed to 32 each for the other two. It also helps that he was the more attacking of the bunch too, and as we all know, attackers are generally viewed higher than pretty much everyone else on the pitch. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Iniesta was 12 when Barcelona scouts came in for him, and despite being shy and missing his home early on, he grew more and more into the player Pep knew he would, which makes the fact that Iniesta had Guardiola posters pinned on his La Masia wall all the more wholesome. In due time, Iniesta would soon become his own hero's hero.
He helped me to understand the game better.
I mean, he also had Catherine Zeta-Jones and Mikel Laudrup propped up on his wall. And if you know anything about those two and how they were viewed in the 90s, it's pretty easy to see why. It was 2002, at 18 when he made his debut for the club, and it was also from then on that Barcelona began to build itself up to its former glory. And by 2005, Barca were again Spanish champions. Iniesta played a starring role, but not in the way you might think. You see, Andrés Iniesta was and is one of the most versatile players that has ever graced football. He is the complete footballer. He can attack and defend. He creates and scores. Vicente del Bosque, former Spanish coach. I played him as a false winger, central midfielder, deep midfielder, and just behind the striker, and he was always excellent. Frank Rijkaard, former Barcelona coach. This translated to him getting a lot more game time, but mostly as a sub and almost always in a different role and position. It's what happens when you're good at everything, I guess. There were those that took exception to him not being included in the starting lineup for the UCL final in 2006, a final that Barcelona did win against Arsenal, with Iniesta being subbed on in the 46th minute. Funnily enough, Xavi was an unused sub in this final. Nonetheless, Iniesta continued to improve where it mattered. Iniesta, similar in stature to Xavi, was not all too physical, but he was swift with lightning reactions, anticipation, and vision. However, the shy guy that arrived at La Masia all those years ago was still there. Not one for the limelight, not one for the fame. Iniesta's always been a player that prefers to let his feet do the talking. Perhaps that's why the media didn't make all that much of a fuss about him until they literally had to. Discos are not my thing. Ironic that this is one of Iniesta's most famous quotes. By the time the 2008 Euros had come around, his value was pretty much unquestionable. He was the only Spanish player that played every game of the tournament, even being named as the man of the match in the semi-finals against Russia. With Xavi and Iniesta in the midfield, Spain went on to win the whole thing, kicking off an era of unprecedented dominance for the nation. Back in Barcelona though, the standards had dropped over the past 2 years. Again, star players were on their way out and the team had dropped down the table. Going into 2008-09, yet another revamp was on the horizon. From the manager all the way down to the core squad, the club was certainly missing a lot of pieces. But as their fortunes took a turn over the following years, there is one piece in particular that many believe was what brought the entire show together. A piece that would unlock the full potential of not only the Wizards we've already spoken about, but the entirety of FC Barcelona. I don't want people talking about me. I don't do many interviews. I don't have Twitter. Forwards get the plaudits, but I'm not selfish like that. I don't long for praise or the lead role. I love my role. I love the job I do. Sounds familiar, right? Not only is Sergio Busquets the youngest, but he's also the most understated of the trio in question. Such is the case when it comes to speciality deep-lying players. Vicente del Bosque's famous remark about not noticing Busquets when things go right or unless you're specifically paying attention to him has proven to be right over and over and over again. For the longest time, football purists would harp on about how Sergio Busquets was the most underrated player on the planet, how Barcelona only ticks because of him, how Messi couldn't do what he does without him, how his presence in front of the defense reassured everyone on the team and made them feel like all they had to do was focus on their job and their job alone. Sounds simple, but it's more rare than you think. Lionel Messi agreed. It only took 3 days of training with him for Messi to turn to then coach Pep Guardiola and simply say, "I like this one." To which Guardiola replied with, "When there is trouble, he will be there." And he was, for the next 15 years. At this point, I think we can all kind of squash the narrative. We're pretty far past the point where anyone can say this guy is underrated. He's pretty highly rated. Born in 1988, Sergio Busquets joined La Masia quite late in comparison. It was 2005 and he was 16. Having already been developing his skill set, he was already primed to impress on his arrival, and he picked the right time to arrive too. Pep Guardiola, who had just begun his journey as a coach, was appointed as the Barcelona B coach in 2007. One of his first actions in this position was the promotion of Sergio Busquets. Now, right now, we all have the luxury of knowing what happened since, but shortly after his arrival, many were left unconvinced by the guy. Years ago, when he was at Barca B, he barely played. They thought that he still did not have a sufficient level and there were players ahead of him. That was Victor Vázquez, a fellow former Barca B player at the time. But that was only half of what he said here. The next bit will bring it all together. Little by little, he made a name for himself, earning Guardiola's trust due to his desire to improve and work. The secret was that Pep saw something special in him. Guardiola, who we should all remember used to play in the exact same position he envisioned for Busquets, was clearly onto something. Again, as one of the first actions when Pep became first-team coach, Busquets was promoted. The pieces were all in order. 08-09. The year Barcelona made history, and it's quite fitting that it was the first year that Xavi, Iniesta and Busquets were all part of the first team. Although it was only the beginning, watching these three in full swing was really something to behold. The triangles and movement that was produced by them made it look like they were playing with children. I said in the intro that they were untouchable, and that's because with possession stats regularly passing the 65% mark, shadows were the only thing that their opponents were left chasing most of the time. Busquets stayed back and made sure the ball transitioned effectively across the pitch every time. Despite being 6'2", much like his colleagues, physicality wasn't exactly his strongest trait. He wasn't the hardest runner, tackler, or intimidating presence. He was pretty good in the air, but it was the anticipation and ability to clock everything that happened around him that made him incomparable. With Xavi slightly more advanced and Iniesta by his side and often even more advanced, I don't think anyone would describe any of these three as goal scorers or goal threats, but it was their influence on those things and everything else that made them unmatched. Barcelona was set for the next 6 years. In the 2009 UCL final, this midfield ran rampant. To this day, I shake my head when I remember that Barcelona made Man United look like toddlers with Yaya Toure at centre-back. It wasn't pretty. Before the match, Ferguson stated that while he recognized the threat of Messi, it was Iniesta that he was truly afraid of. Now, while I do get what he was saying and this quote fits into the general narrative I'm trying to weave in this video, the entire team was pretty scary. As the years rolled on, it became strikingly apparent that these three formed the best midfield that world football had to offer, on the domestic scene and on the international scene. In 2010, they contributed heavily towards Spain's first and only World Cup triumph. While Busquets was the only player to make it into the official team of the tournament, Iniesta scored the winner in the 116th minute of the final and was also named as the man of the match. Xavi, on the other hand, completed more passes than anyone else in the whole tournament, 599, with a 91% completion rate. He also ran more than anyone else, 80.2 kilometers in total over the tournament, covering 15 kilometers in the final. Of all 5 players that started in the middle for Spain in the final, Xavi, Iniesta and Busquets were the only ones that remained on the pitch throughout the entire match, all the way through to the end of extra time. When you really look into it, it just gets more and more impressive. 2011 brought on a third consecutive year of what seemed like endless success. Another La Liga title, a second Champions League with this trio, and a loss in the Copa del Rey final, thanks to a winner in extra time, denied them another treble. 2012 was a repeat of 2008 in the Euros, with Spain winning it all. It wouldn't be until 2015 when Barcelona would return to the finals of the Champions League and win it all again. They boasted yet another classic team that had undergone a large revamp over the past couple of years. Suarez, Neymar and Messi formed the deadliest attacking trio maybe ever, and Ivan Rakitic had given the midfield a major boost. For both Barcelona and Spain, there had been a lot of changes over time, but something that had not changed was the presence of the trio in question. The path to greatness is obviously never easy. Apart from the obvious trials and tribulations of just trying to make it as a professional athlete, the ups and downs of life in general can make it hard for anybody to succeed. Iniesta lost a close friend and former Espanyol captain, Daniel Jarque, in 2009, a devastating loss that made it extremely difficult for him to even finish training sessions. He then went on to build himself up again after the loss and win his country's first ever World Cup. a year later. An illustration of how important luck and the right environment comes into play can be seen with Xavi in 2008. He was close to leaving Barcelona back then as things simply weren't going their way, and some believed he was part of the problem. At Euro 2008, I was told the club wanted to sell me. Real Madrid were winning, and us, nothing. I spoke to my agent and there was an offer from Bayern Munich. But then we hired Guardiola and I had a great tournament. Pep told me not to move. I'm starting to think that it's entirely possible that Barcelona owe a lot of their success to this Guardiola guy. Had he not been around, perhaps neither Xavi nor Busquets would have even been present all the way back in 2008. Real Madrid fans punching air right now. Sadly, nothing lasts forever. As with everything, one day it will be time for all of us to walk away. The first to go was Xavi. 2015, 35 years of age, departed as captain and even won a treble on his way out. Next was Andrés Iniesta. 2018, 34 years of age, departed as captain and won a double while at it. And now we have Sergio Busquets. 2023, 35 this year, departing as captain and as a La Liga winner after years of disappointment for the club with Xavi as his manager. Saying that the current crop of Barcelona midfielders are promising would be a massive understatement. Not one, but two Golden Boy winners in as many years says just that. But I don't think I'm alone in saying that it will take a lot to even be comparable to the level of excellence that was produced by the midfield that Barcelona and Spain boasted over this crazy period. Players who, if we consider both club and country, I firmly believe to be the greatest midfield I've ever seen. And there we have it. Let me know what you guys think about this trio. That's all for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you in the next one.